Y'all ready? They don't look ready. I'm ready while they're doing their thing. Before we get started in our program, and I'll let our MC over there introduce and explain and get all that, I wanted to take the opportunity, since here we have a platform, we're going out live on YouTube and hopefully Facebook if we get that going. And so we're going to reach, I don't know how many people. We'll see who shows up tomorrow or whatever for the conference, but I wanted to be able to offer a chance to help out Cassia. Whenever I was here several years ago, I got to know her a little bit, and just wonderful woman and great family. They've had some hard times lately, and so I wanted to give her a chance to say something about that in ways that maybe people could help. You want to come on up and say a word and point people to what maybe they can do for you.
Well, first I want to give a big thank you to the Mentionables group and project, and Pastor Mark Lambert for inviting me to share some needs that we have. I'm not a speaker. I'm a wife and a stay-at-home mom to 5 kids under 11. But we just found out this past couple months that my husband, who's 38, has 4th stage colorectal cancer. And so we've been going through treatments just about every day, radiation and chemotherapy. On top of that, back in August, I lost my younger brother, Jeremiah Thomas, to bone cancer when he was 16 years old. So my kids are not only having to process through my husband's situation, they're grieving their uncle's loss as well. So I just want to thank you for hearing me out. My husband is to the point in his treatment where he is unable to work, and so he is just sleeping and trying to get his body to heal from the cancer and chemotherapy. So far, God has been faithful to provide for our family more than we could have ever imagined. We have many people and friends in the body of Christ who are supporting us through different benefits and fundraisers on Facebook. If you want to follow our page, it's Fighting for 5 on Facebook. And in the back, I'll have a table with different fundraisers that are happening to help support our family in this time of need. We've got some bracelets in the back for sale and just a donation jar. So thank you so much, and God bless. Robbie Waxman, I'm sorry, is my husband's name. He's 38 years old.
Okay, thank you. And we'll post a link to your Facebook page and stuff there. Anyone who's interested in following up on that. Okay. That is that. Now we're waiting for the monkeys to poke something with sticks.
Okay, cool. So welcome everyone to the Missionables Conference. This is our 2nd annual national conference. Last year we were in North Carolina. This year we are in Waco, Texas. Next year, debate on locale, possibly California. So you guys are more than welcome to come out. So again, we're Missionables. We're just a small-time group of apologetics who want to share the gospel with people and help encourage the layperson in the defense of the faith. So tonight we have our speakers, starting first with Clinton Wilcox, who is with Pro-Life. He is a speaker, teacher, blogger at Life Training Institute. Next to him is Mark Lambert, who is the pastor here. What's the name of your?
Liberty Hill.
Liberty Hill. You would think I would know that by now. So he's pastor, also one of our network members for the apologetics team. Then Joel Forches, the founder. Also, he has the Missionables. He's written a couple of blogs, a couple of books. We have our books at the merch table. And then Tyler Vela is the close enough. Is the moderator and host of the Free Thinker podcast. So I'll turn it over to you guys to just kind of give your own brief introductions.
Start, Tyler?
Sure. So Tyler from the Free Thinker podcast. We have a microphone. The Free Thinker was really born out of my experience growing up as an unbeliever, growing up as an atheist for about the first 20 years of my life. Came to the Lord in actually a philosophy program at university from an atheistic philosopher professor. So kind of an interesting turn of events there. So God uses all different types of means to bring us to himself. So in coming out of atheism and naturalism, being very aware of some of the objections and some of the arguments for and against Christianity in that sense, a lot of my initial experience in apologetics was really dealing with the rise of the new atheism, because that's when I converted in about 2000. Post 9/11 is when the new atheists, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, Christopher Hitchens, all of them were really writing and advocating a denial and a rejection of the faith. And so that was the sphere that I was very much involved in dealing with and responding to. And then during my time at Moody Bible Institute in Chicago, I got more exposed to other issues dealing with more ecumenical issues and biblical studies. And so the Free Thinker podcast is kind of a mix of all of my different loves and passions, dealing with apologetics to non-believing, specifically atheistic community, but also dealing with some biblical theological issues as well. So that's kind of what the content is.
Hi there, everybody. I'm Joel Furchess, and I began my work in apologetics as a Christian journalist, writing for a publication called The Examiner. Don't look it up because it's no longer around. They weren't a Christian publication, but they were a news journal that hired people all over the country to write in every subject you can imagine. And so I was supposed to find news related to Christianity. I kind of heavily focused on the area of apologetics when I did that. I got to interview some big names in the field. I interviewed Frank Turek and Jim Warner Wallace and some other people whose names aren't coming to me. But I also interviewed a lot of the little guys. I really enjoyed seeing people who were starting up and they had their own ministries, but they didn't have any kind of recognition. And so I tried to give them recognition by interviewing them or sampling their blogs, podcasts, whatever it is that they did, and then doing reviews of those. And that was really exciting. Of the two, meeting famous people and getting to interview them, or Paul Copan, that was the other one. Getting to meet famous people and interviewing them, or meeting people who were talented and were getting started and enthusiastic and really had a message but not a voice. I really enjoyed giving the exposure to the little guys more than I did meeting the famous people. So after a few years in that milieu, I got this idea in my mind, and it was mostly just a fantasy, a daydream of starting my own conference, right? Invite some people to my church. Now I was on a first name basis with several of the big guys, and I could have a really intense apologetics conference. But I thought it would be cooler if I could get these little guys, the guys that were talented and knew what they were talking about. They just didn't have the platform, and do a conference with them. And because these guys come in without anybody knowing who they are, I call them the mentionables. That was mostly a joke in my head. So I shared the joke online one time, and then these guys all started joking around, and then for some reason we got a Facebook page, and then a website, and then we published a book, and did a podcast, and somebody set up a conference for us. So we did that, and things kind of snowballed from there, and here we are at the second national conference. As far as my background and specialty, I went to a Christian college, but I didn't take any kind of Christian degree. So I got my degree in psychology, and then later on, I studied educational theory and developmental psychology, so I'm a licensed special educator. And so as a consequence of that, a lot of the stuff I end up focusing on is psychology of religion. Now, a lot of people think psychology and religion, oil and water, they just don't mix. But understanding how people behave and how that relates to very Christian concepts, things like sin, things like our knowledge of in the internal sense of God. There's a lot of things where the application is real. The other thing is, a lot of these skeptics will try to use psychology against Christianity as an argument about why Christianity is just in our heads. So looking at those arguments and examining them actually tends to be very important as well. So, Mark, anybody know you?
I'm the least interesting person on the stage, I'm sure. My name is Mark Lambert. I'm the pastor at Liberty Hill Baptist Church in Moody. I started out in college ministry at MCC, doing apologetics. I didn't know that's what it was called at the time, but that's what we were doing, was answering people's questions. God, I said, Lord, I will serve you anywhere you want me to serve you. Just do not ask me to be a youth minister. And he said, challenge accepted. You get to be a youth minister. And so I then spent almost 10 years in youth ministry, still dabbling in college ministry when I was able. Until one day, I was actually serving here at Tree Lake as the youth pastor when Pastor Jeff said, don't take this the wrong way, but I want you to leave. And I said, what? And he said, there's a church somewhere that needs a pastor, and it needs to be you. So you need to go. And he kind of gently, not so gently, pushed me out of the nest, and I landed at Liberty Hill. And all these years, my ministry, whether it's been as a student leader with the Baptist Student Ministry, as a campus minister, as a youth minister, as a pastor, it's always centered around helping people wrestle through with and find answers. And so that's just what I continue to do. So I'm glad to be a part of a group like this. That's what y'all like doing. So there we go. That's me.
All right. Well, I'm the least good-looking member of the Mentionables. So I'll take after Mark here. Yeah, and actually, this is actually my third time being in Texas, and it's always greener than I expect it to be. So that's always nice. My relationship with apologetics really began after I graduated high school. I was raised as a Christian, and I was taught certain things growing up in church. I went to a Southern Baptist church. But when I graduated from high school, I really went through a questioning phase, and I was questioning, is Christianity actually defensible through reasonable arguments, or is it something that I just believe because I was taught it as a kid? And so I went through this phase where I wanted to really research what the arguments were for Christianity, and I went to I found a local Bible store. It was called Berean at the time, but it's recently changed its name and moved elsewhere in town. But I came across a few books, one by Lee Strobel called The Case for Christ, one by C.S. Lewis called Mere Christianity, and another one by Norm Geisler, the Baker Encyclopedia of Christian Apologetics. And through reading those books, I came to realize that yes, Christianity actually is defensible through arguments outside of the Bible, that you can actually defend Christianity through science, through philosophy, and through even just defending the Bible itself. And so that kind of set me on a trajectory toward wanting to teach apologetics and to support the teaching of apologetics in church, because I could have easily have just left the faith because I had no one teaching me the foundation of Christianity, and I had no one really guiding me. Well, I had one person guiding me. The Trinity was guiding me towards these books. But if I didn't already have that faith in God, if I was just a genuine seeker, I may never have ever set foot in that Bible church or that Bible store, and I would have never encountered those books that led me to realize that Christianity is defensible. And so I think that churches need to do a much better job in teaching apologetics, and that's one of the reasons why I've decided to become an apologist myself. And specifically, the reason that I went into the abortion field is because I started attending college, and in college I actually took a public speaking class because I've always been kind of socially awkward, and I wanted to improve my communication skills with other people. And one of the speeches I had to give had to be on a controversial topic. And colleges were a lot more open about the free exchange of ideas back then. So my teacher actually allowed me to do abortion as the topic of my speech. And the topic, or the speech that we gave had to be completely balanced. We had to present both sides equally to where no one could tell which side of the aisle that you came down on. And of course, I chose the topic of abortion. I had never really thought about it. I never, never really had to deal with it in high school because I never went too far with any girl. Was never really taught anything about it. None of my friends, as far as I knew, ever had to deal with abortion or anything like that. So it was just something that I never thought about. And then as I started to do the research on abortion and realized what it was and started seeing the scientific facts of human development, it was something that I decided that I just couldn't stay silent about anymore. So now I've come to view abortion as kind of the ultimate form of oppression of the strong over the weak. It's basically the ultimate form of bullying. It's people who are in the way of what some other people want, and those other people are bigger and stronger and able to do something about the smaller and weaker person, that they're able to basically kill them in order to give themselves an easier time in some situations. So it was just something that I felt that I couldn't remain silent about anymore. And so that's basically in a nutshell, my journey into apologetics. So.
All right, cool. Thank you, guys. So what we're going to do is just have a in-panel discussion. So it's just kind of the guys are going to be talking about a certain topic amongst themselves, and then we'll later on open it up to questions from you guys. So.
All right, so we were hoping that the topic would be one suggested by the audience. This is the first night panel, which means we're interacting with you. So what we want now is we want a topic related to philosophy or Christianity or apologetics, related to something we can speak to. And then we're going to discuss that on panel in front of you. And this is something that you're permitted, in fact, encouraged to interact with. So think about it a moment and then see, does anybody have a suggestion of something you want to hear discussed by a panel of experts such as ourselves? Similar to us, good.
There's also live streaming, so
Yeah.
Yeah, nothing's on the live stream just yet. So.
Anybody watching the live stream, we will take questions from the stream as well. We're
Yeah.
streaming on YouTube and Facebook.
Let's go with this topic. Apologetics is kind of a wide open field. So just as there are different types of churches, denominations, there are different styles of apologetics. So do you all have a particular style of apologetics that you apply to a debate, or do you just kind of use a shotgun method, or is there a more precise method of style of apologetics or theme to your apologetics ministry?
All right, well, I've already talked about the theme of my apologetics ministry. I fell into that theme kind of accidentally. I didn't actually try to get a degree in philosophy or in psychology. If I had my way, I'd be an artist right now, but things happened and I accidentally got a degree in psychology. And then as I began as an apologist, I was following a group of atheists, and on the panel there was a professor of psychology, and he did psychology of religion, except he kind of used it against religion, specifically Christianity. So a lot of the early writing that I did was in response to his arguments. And so I needed to know psychology in order to assess his arguments, and it just so happens I did know psychology. And it just kind of snowballed from there. So yes, I tend to focus on psychology, which again, it is something useful in the field in a certain sense. As far as types of apologetics, there's really two approaches, and they're typically in conflict with one another. One essentially says that you can reason your way to God. So if you use evidence and reason, you can eventually come around to God. The other says that no, God is the presupposition that we need to build upon for reason. So reason comes from God. We don't reason our way to God. We use God as the presupposition upon which we build those reasons.
I was thinking, if we actually had a presuppositionalist here that could explain what presuppositionalism is.
That would be
That would
wonderful.
be wonderful.
Do we have that though?
Do we have to have someone?
Yeah, so I am the token presuppositionalist reformed person on the panel. Presuppositionalism, like Joel was saying, is the idea that God is the foundation for all things, and one of those things is reason itself. So in creating humanity in the image of God, one of those faculties is that we are imbued with the capacity for reason, the capacity to reflect God by our reasoning capacities. So when we're speaking to the unbeliever and we are trying to debate or defend Christianity with them, the tactic, rather than kind of an evidentialist approach, which is to say, okay, well, let's look at science and let's look at some of these other historical facts and things. We can do those things, but the idea behind the presuppositionalist is to start by saying, along with Romans, that everybody, God has made himself known through his creation, and everyone suppresses the truth and unrighteousness. And so the unbeliever, in actually trying to reason against God, is using their God-given reason to try to reason against God. And so there's this idea of the unbeliever kind of sitting on the lap of God to try to slap God in the face. They have to use the very tools, the very image of God in order to try to deny the one who has granted and bestowed the image. And so presuppositionalism basically comes and says, well, we all actually presuppose God. The question is which one of us can consistently do so. And clearly, as a Christian presuppositionist, we're going to say, well, the Christian is the one that can consistently do so because we are recognizing the God who has made us in his image, that even grounds and allows us to reason for us.
And I'm actually what would be considered a classical apologist, in that classical apologetics has somewhat to do with evidentialism because we use arguments as evidence for God's existence. But I come at Christianity more from the Thomism bent, which is very heavily influenced by Aristotle. Thomas Aquinas, who was an ancient Christian philosopher, took Aristotelianism and improved upon it, especially as regards how it pertains to Christianity. And so, while you have the modern arguments for God's existence, like the ones from William Lane Craig and the teleological argument, the moral argument, argument from Christ's resurrection, all of these are good arguments, but I tend to favor some of the more classical arguments, such as Thomas Aquinas' first way, the argument from motion, and certain arguments like that. And so I come at it more from a Thomistic perspective, which also I think best lays the groundwork for my pro-life convictions as well. So I would come at it more from a classical kind of perspective.
And I'd like to hear Tyler's thoughts on this as well. I guess I'm more of a mutt. I use whatever is needed for the person who's sitting in front of me that I'm talking to. I can argue some Aquinas. I can, point out to him, hey, you know what? Without God, your reasoning ain't working. I can say, hey, okay, you want some historical case? Let's go there and see some evidence. But there's some people who say, no, you can't do that. There's the conflict, and that if you're doing any evidential at all, then no, that's a different thing. That's tomorrow morning. Conflict. But there's some who give the idea that. Some from the precept camp who would say that, you know what, if you're doing evidence at all, you can't just start with the evidence. You have got to go start with God, and otherwise you're just doing it all wrong. Where would you kind of thoughts be in there?
Yeah. It's a really good question. There's kind of within presuppositionalism, there's people who follow the writing and thinking of a man named Cornelius Van Til, the Van Tillian, and then there's people who follow more Gordon Clark, who's a Clarkian presuppositionalist. What you're describing is a little bit more of a Clarkian presuppositionalism. I'm far more Van Tillian, so I'm going to say, well, you can use, there's no problem with evidence and history because under God, under the way that God has created things, our minds, our rationality, we are able to understand the creation that He places in. And so the question is, well, what comes up is almost this ethical question of, are we allowing too much common ground with the unbeliever? Are we saying are we affirming them in their kind of autonomous reason in order to reject the creative grounded reason? I'm with you. I'm a little bit more of what's called a cumulative case in that sense, where I'm going to say, okay, well, at the end of the day, we can't do any of this stuff unless God exists first. God is the foundation for it. I'll usually start with that with an unbeliever, if the topic isn't already kind of pre-decided. But that doesn't mean that you can't move on to evidences and basically point out kind of the consistency problem. So in talking with an unbeliever, saying, kind of, most people are familiar with the moral argument: God didn't exist, objective moral values and duties wouldn't exist, objective moral values and duties do exist, therefore God exists. There's almost a presuppositional version of that, which is if God did not exist, laws of logic and rationality wouldn't exist, laws of logic and rationality do exist, therefore God exists. And so the question is, if we're having this conversation with an unbeliever and they're trying to use logic and reason to understand science, evidence, history, all that kind of stuff, we're already starting 100 yards downstream, and we can call them out on it to begin with, and then move on to those discussions, and then just every now and then try to poke a little hole in the roof to let some water in as you go. So yeah, I wouldn't say like you're doing something that's obscenely terrible to not like stay on the laws of logic the entire time.
So a lot of people forget that apologetics doesn't just involve the unbeliever. Apologetics is important for the church as well. Otherwise, I'm assuming you guys wouldn't be here. So that being the case, oftentimes when you're doing what I call internal apologetics, meaning that you're speaking to another believer, building evidence for what you believe is no bad thing, because you walk away from that conversation with more confidence that what you believe is true. Or alternately, you learned something you didn't know before, and you have to adjust your views of it to fit the evidence that you just built. The evidence didn't disprove what you believed. In fact, it improved your belief by giving you more rational thoughts on the matter, some more concrete foundation upon which your beliefs are built. So evidentialism, if it doesn't work on the unbeliever, and I have questions about that because I have case studies in which it seems like it did, at the very least is very important inside the church. We need reasons for our belief. We don't want to build our belief completely just because the pastor says so, or the Bible said it, I believe it, that finishes it. Now, knowing the context, knowing the information, the more information you have upon which your belief is built, the more stable that foundation is, the more confidence you have on that. So yeah, evidentialism, if it doesn't work outside the church, and I don't think that's true, it definitely does work in the church. But when I'm just initiating a conversation, or more frequently a conversation is initiated with me in regards to arguments against Christianity. If somebody is coming in and attacking Christianity, I almost always fall back on presuppositionalists, because if they're using any kind of argument against me, there has to be a foundation for that argument. They got to be coming from somewhere. So, and I want to be sensitive to this. A coworker of mine once asked me why God, if he existed, would allow her little brother to have been stillborn. She never got to know her brother because he was born stillborn. And, this was a sticking point for her. It was something she couldn't get over. And I was saying, okay, this little brother was very important to you. So important that you think a God should have allowed him to live. Where does that importance come from? The value that you place on him, this love that you have for him, which I believe in. What is the foundation for that? What gives this life value? I mean, he died before he came out of the womb, and yet you're mourning his death. And that's important. But why? What gives that importance? So that is a presupposition that she held as she was attacking God. And that's an important presupposition. She had the right instinct there, and that instinct has to come from somewhere. And most arguments you find against God operate from some kind of foundation that is based on God, as Tyler was telling us. So yeah, evidentialism, I tend to do that internally to the church. Presuppositionalism, it's a very important foundation to have when addressing somebody specifically that's attacking Christianity.
All right. Does anyone have a topic for discussion? Sure.
Okay, so what makes you think that you have the right God when there's several different religions?
Sorry, that's the talk I'm getting.
Like, why is Christianity the right God?
Should we repeat the question for the?
Yeah. So the question was basically, why is Christianity why do we think that we have the belief in the right God? Why not, right, the one and only, why not Mormonism, why not Islam, why not Hinduism, something like that? Joel maybe should give a short answer, because that is his talk tomorrow. But without giving away your talk and stealing your thunder, maybe we can say a couple brief comments. And I don't know how much you want to give away of your talk. My initial answer to the question would, again, largely be as a presuppositionalist. I'm going to say that God is the necessary precondition for something like the laws of logic. That there's an impossibility of the contrary. That if specifically the Christian God that's revealed in the Scriptures didn't exist, then laws of logic wouldn't exist, because it gets more than we get to here, but you start getting into questions about what a possible foundation could be for it. You start getting into things that are, outside of time, personal, omni-rational, omnipotent. You start getting basically all the attributes of the God of Christianity as a type of foundation for that. So that's going to be part of my answer specifically as a presuppositionalist. Again, that's an unsatisfying answer in such a short nutshell, but that's going to be part of my answer to that.
I'm sure Joel's answer tomorrow will be much more satisfying.
Yeah, you can about 45 minutes.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I haven't seen, Joel's notes or his talk or anything, so I'm gonna try not to steal his answer, otherwise I might be sleeping on the car tonight. Yeah, so the way that I would answer it as a classical apologist is, well, basically, my basic answer is just that, well, I believe that the Christian God is true, and if the Christian, I think you're in this gentleman's way, Jamie, maybe you can move just a little bit, there you go, okay, I got your back. Yeah, so basically, my basic response is, well, I believe there's good evidence for the Christian God, and if the Christian God exists, then necessarily all other gods don't exist. You can look at each god individually and argue, well, for example, the Greek pantheon of gods are more like superheroes. They're not like actual gods. But when we talk about the Christian God is what we would consider omnipotent, meaning that he's all powerful. And if there is one omnipotent being, there can only be one omnipotent being. If there were two omnipotent beings, one being could always cancel out the actions of the other, and so at least one of them would not truly be omnipotent. So if we conceive of God as the greatest possible being, including an omnipotent being, then there can really only be one God. There can't be multiples. And so that's kind of my nutshell answer, because I really want to make sure I'm not stealing Joel's answer for tomorrow. So that's how I would answer, just at a basic level there.
Okay, so we seem to be transitioning into the question and answer section. The idea was throw out a topic and we discuss it, which is fine. We'll do question and answer in a second. Before we do that, there was one topic that somebody who had been following us wanted us to do. So let's do that and then we'll start the question and answer. All right. The topic that one of our followers had wanted us to discuss tonight was the topic of heaven. That's all he said. So I'll start out since I have the mic. So heaven. Heaven is a kind of misunderstood concept in the Bible, because there's this idea that you be a Christian, you die, you go to this glorious place in the sky somewhere, and then you spend eternity. This is not the picture given in the Bible, because a lot of the Bible, starting the Old Testament and throughout the New Testament, talks about the return of Christ, the resurrection of the dead, and then the Christians reigning in the new heaven and new earth, sort of a recreation of the world we're in into a perfect version of the world we're in, at which point there would be no resurrection if we didn't have bodies, so we're not dwelling spiritually forever. We have perfected bodies like Christ, and we dwell in those for eternity in a new heaven and a new earth. What that's going to look like, it's not terribly clear, but it's going to look good, I'm assuming. So what happens to our souls between when we die and when we're resurrected? Well, for instance, Jesus said to the thief on the cross, "This day you will be with me in paradise." So there's the indication, at least, that there is some heavenly realm where our souls go to reside until the resurrection. What the heavenly realm would be like, I'm not sure you can describe a spiritual realm in a way that we can understand. But that's my understanding of heaven. Who's next?
Okay, yeah, so, obviously just heaven is kind of a really, really broad topic. And, heaven is not the ultimate destination for the believer. Because we're awaiting a day when Christ will come back to raise the living and the dead, to meet him in the sky, and he'll create the new heavens and new earth. And so heaven, as we understand it now, is really not the final destination. And so as a Thomist, I don't simply believe that human beings are souls that inhabit physical bodies, but I believe that the physical body and the soul are intimately entwined, in that both parts are important to the person. And so when we enter the disembodied state after we die, we're basically going to be existing in a diminished state, because our ultimate state is not to be disembodied, but our bodies and our souls are both important to us as persons. And so heaven is just kind of a temporary waiting place until Christ returns to raise the dead in Christ, and then to raise up everyone to meet him in the sky, and we go on to the new heaven and new earth. So it's just kind of that's just kind of my understanding of heaven at the moment.
The easy answer regarding heaven is, I don't know, I've never been there. Whenever the Bible talks of heaven, it uses a lot of symbolic language. A lot of our concepts of heaven come from art that was trying to interpret symbolism. A lot of the just traditional ideas that we walk around with about what heaven's going to be like, it comes from art, it comes from a lot of medieval art. And they were just trying to take symbolism from the Bible and put it in symbolism of their day, and different things that went about. One thing that has always stood out to me, just always seemed weird to me, with the pictures of, like you were saying, it's like, oh, we're just going to go float on clouds for eternity, just, nice and fun, we have, playing harps, electric harp. Yeah. Can it be an electric harp with some distortion on it? All right. And so that always just seemed weird to me. Even when I was a kid, because I'm like, God makes us this world with all of its wonders and amazing, things to find and discover and do, and experiences to have, and heaven, the ultimate, or as we, eternity, as we go on to paradise, and the ultimate experience that we have for all eternity is going to be sitting around playing harps. That just never seemed right to me. And so as I've kind of, dug into it some, it's whatever the specifics of heaven are going to look like, it's God going to be reestablishing kind of what he had intended, I think, from the beginning. That it's the restoration of Eden, for lack of a better way of putting it. And whatever the world is going to be like then, it's going to be bigger and better and greater and more wonderful than this one is. This one's pretty darn good.
So, and I'll actually probably end getting closer to the question that you had asked. For me, one of the important things to do is to read and understand the Bible in a redemptive historical approach, so that from beginning to end, it all points us towards Jesus Christ. Everything about creation, through the fall, through the patriarchs, through time of the Judges, Israel, the prophets, obviously the New Testament. Everything is marching towards Christ as the fulfillment of history. And so one of the things I think is important to remember is that creation, when we sometimes have this idea that God created the universe, he set it up, and he set it up almost as like the way that it was supposed to be, and then we ruined it. Like that, like the ruining was like plan B, and then God had to do something and fix it again. And so we sometimes think about it in these terms of, well, God's gonna, and I know that it's not quite what you meant, but the way sometimes we phrase it gets the idea across of God's gonna put us back into Eden, like we're just going back there. And there's this idea in the scriptures that that God, we were made in Eden. God set up His creation, but that's really chapter 1. It marches through redemptive history with if there was no fall, we have to remember there would be no Christ, and how would the people of God in Christ be conformed to the image of Christ if there was no Christ? And so there's this idea of that the fall is not some accident that caught God unawares, right? It didn't catch Him off guard. It wasn't something that was unplanned or not ordained. I mean, the Bible tells us that by the definite plan of God, that the Pharisees put Christ to death. That the leaders, their names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life. That we were chosen in Christ or before the foundations of the world. These are all ideas that from the very beginning God had planned and ordained history to be worked out this way. And so when Christ returns in the resurrection, there is a very real sense where it's a return to Eden, but it's a return to Eden in Christ, in the image of Christ.
Not that we're just going back to a garden.
Right. We're not just going back to like something like, hey, we're cool being naked again, like we're just whatever. But there is this idea that there is a where Adam and Eve were simply innocent, that we will be returning as righteous in Christ.
If we were going to be returning to a naked state, I would hope they have a gym there and they're able to get a little more frequently.
Nice to stay, yeah. So there, to carry on what we were talking about, there is a sense where we're not going to this ethereal realm of heaven. It is an embodied new heavens and new earth, but it's not simply going back to plan A as to fix everything that was broken. It actually is the end game that was there the entire time. And so if I could transition into your question, your next question follow-up was, well, why doesn't God just kind of snap and blink Satan out of existence? Or why did He just not create him in the first place, knowing what would come about, right? Part of my answer is going to be, I recognize is somewhat unsatisfactory, because I'm going to say, Deuteronomy 31:31, the secret things belong to the Lord. No idea why God did it that way, but what I can say is I know that it wasn't an accident. I know that it was part of His foreordained, definite plan that He had worked towards, that it was going towards Jesus Christ. There's a very real sense when we talk about something like the problem of evil, where we ask, well, why would God allow suffering? Why would God allow Satan? Why would God allow whatever it is? We have to remember that His answer was Christ on the cross. It was Christ who been crucified for us. So whatever answer we have, whatever purpose it has to be, it can't be that God is out of control. It can't be that God is caught unawares. It can't be that God doesn't care, because God has shown His love for us by sending His Son in Jesus Christ to die in our place, to bring about the culmination of history according to His plan. So that's kind of where I would add and get back to some of your questions.
One thing that I would add on that, and we seem to want to, sometimes we want to make special category for religious questions, like they need, a special answer, like the sorts of reasoning that would work in other everyday life wouldn't work with God. It needs to be a different kind of answer. I have small children, and there are things that we have to do, and they don't know why. They can't grasp why, in their limited understanding and their scope of the world. Even if I tried to explain it to them, they wouldn't have a clue what I was talking about. It wouldn't matter. They would still be mad. Why are we doing it this way, Daddy? And in some sense, it's just the same way between us and God. That why does He allow Satan? Why is He doing it this way? I don't know. But I also feel like when it comes to like me and God, I'm more like my 4-year-old, asking, well, why not, than I am like an intelligent, person trying to reason something out.
Right. And just give it back, but just to to answer, because what I was saying is the other no, is that there is enough told to us, like you as a parent, you've loved your children, you've provided for them. There's enough that your children know about you that even if they don't know your answer to something, they have enough to know that you love them, that you have your best interests, and that their obedience is still the good and right thing to do.
All right, yeah, so we're question and answer now. First question, why doesn't God just kill Satan? All right, my initial question would be, well, why would he? Well, Satan's the ultimate bad guy, right? He's the adversary that God has to struggle against. Or does he? I mean, it's God. What kind of struggle would there be between God and a creature?
You ever notice how demons react when Jesus encounters them? There's never a struggle. It's not an exorcism.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like this big battle. It's
Right.
they wet themselves and run away.
Okay, so, but yeah, still, Satan's a bad, he's an evil in the world, right? So why not get rid of the evil of Satan? Well, what did Satan ever do in the world? Well, he tempted Eve. Right, he did. He tempted her. But did he force the fruit down her throat? No, she gave in to a temptation. He was an instrument to deliver temptation, and she made a decision, a free will decision. We can be bad with or without Satan, and I suspect that we would. So Satan isn't the problem. I mean, he might go, well, he tempted Christ. Yeah, he did tempt Christ. Christ didn't give in to the temptation because Christ was the perfect creature. Well, not creature, sorry. Being, let's say it that way. All right, so yeah, and I was having a conversation with Clinton earlier. I actually think that Satan serves an important purpose, and what would that be? Well, if you look at all of the passages in which Satan exists, he's always trying to find some kind of way to circumvent God's plan. So, he calls the fall of humans in the garden. But God was able to get around that problem, that foible. He, got into a conversation with God about Job. Well, who initiated that conversation? Actually, God did.
What all of our neighbors in Egypt and Mesopotamia, all of you think happened, you think it's done by war or by copulation. That's not how it's done. God really spoke, and it came to be. So there's some of that going on. So part of what comes about in my ministry is I just don't think the evolution question is that. I don't think it's that important. I think it's far more contentious than it needs to be, because I think while it's an interesting question, I think it's a scientific fact.
Took on the nature of a man and became fully God, fully human, and impregnated Mary with the Holy Spirit. She consented to it, and Jesus was conceived and was born. And so I don't think it's necessarily a case of God entering time specifically as God, the metaphysical ground of all being. I think the second person of the Trinity is probably the one who entered into time in some respect, but again, it's not really something that we can comprehend too much. So I think it's more the second person of the Trinity may have entered into a physical realm and entered into a timely realm, but it wasn't God, the metaphysical being, who entered into time. And that's kind of the best way I can answer this question. I'm just trying to illustrate that I don't completely comprehend the Trinity, and for those reasons. And that's just kind of my grasping at straws to try and understand how this question can be resolved. So.
All right, let's operate off the assumption that God is timeless and that Jesus was temporal, meaning in time. First of all, we read in the Bible that God is He who searches hearts and minds. So if God is timeless, at the same time, He's experiencing our thoughts, our feelings, and seeing through our eyes simultaneously throughout history. He is aware of our experiences, even if He's timeless. So in that sense, God can experience time with His omniscience by knowing what we know as we experience time. So here we have Christ. he is in time, he's acting in time, but we also know that Christ has two natures. So asking that is similar to asking, well, how could God get hungry? How could God go to sleep? How could God die? You know, there is a human nature to the second person of the Trinity, as well as a godly nature. He is both God and he is man. So it's not unusual to say that he does man things, which is make decisions, operate from information in the past, make decisions in the present in order to actualize the future, and at the same time be present along the continuum of his life. There is, and this is a thought experiment. I'm not throwing this out as actual doctrine, but there's this question about, well, how is it that Jesus one death pays for all sins? How does his taking a punishment pay for all sins of everybody who is saved by his punishment? Well, let's consider this. If God is timeless, then God is eternally aware of the punishment that Jesus is taking. There is no other person on the earth that can be eternally aware of a moment of pain or of their moment of death or anything like that. And yet, again, making this assumption that God is outside of time and therefore eternally aware of every moment in time, he is also eternally aware, conscious of the experience that Christ had on the cross. So that is more or less an eternal punishment that he suffers. So yeah, Christ's humanly nature and his godly nature can explain how he can operate in time and also external to time.
All right. Any other questions?
So, yeah, so the question was, how do we explain the Big Bang? God spoke and bang, it happened? Is that, okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's anything really to explain. I mean, the Big Bang was discovered by a Catholic priest, in fact, and it was originally proposed. Oh, it wasn't. Okay. Okay, I'm probably the wrong guy to be talking right now. Then I'm the bioethics guy. I'm not the history of science guy. But it was proposed by a Catholic priest, and so yeah. So I mean, I don't see the Big Bang as incompatible with Christianity. In fact, it was opposed by atheistic scientists because of its theistic implications. It shows that if it was correct, it would show that there was a beginning in time of the universe, and the beginning in time implies that it had a beginner, because the universe is a contingent thing, and contingent things require something outside itself to create, because something cannot create itself. That would be incoherent. So if the universe had a beginning in time, then it would require something outside itself to create it, and something outside itself would be God. So the theistic implications were staggering to these atheistic scientists. So I think that the Big Bang actually argues in favor of Christianity.
Yeah, and so the topic of the debate tomorrow is, has Christianity historically been in conflict with science? So it's like the conflict thesis. So part of my research of that has actually gone into this, and Clinton is right that when George Lemaitre first proposed the Big Bang, or the idea of cosmic inflation, it was originally opposed and objected against by largely by the atheistic community, because they held what's called the steady state notion. The steady state notion of the universe was that the universe had essentially always existed. And the Big Bang was actually Fred Hoyle's term against the Big Bang. It was his way of mocking it. He was basically saying, well, they're proposing a Big Bang of things, like it was actually a derisive term that ended up catching on, kind of like the term Christianity. Christian was actually a demeaning term that we appropriated ourselves. We reappropriated it, that's right. The Big Bang was very similar. The atheists I can't remember his name, he was a steady state theorist all the way up through the 80s, he was one of the last holdouts at the University of San Diego or San Diego State, I think San Diego State. You know, he accused Penzias, and when they discovered the background radiation, he basically said that, you know, everyone on their staff belongs to the Church of Jesus Christ of the Big Bang. And so there's this very derisive term where they thought, well, they're not doing science, they're proposing a creator, they're just trying to get God's, you know, foot in through the back door by proposing, you know, basically the moment of creation. You can't do that, that's not science. And then effectively, as we've discovered, you know, background radiation, we've discovered redshift, we've discovered all kinds of things. We have tons of confirmation for something like the Big Bang. So and the rapid expansion. So that would be, I think, in explaining it, there's the scientific question of, well, how did it actually happen? But then there's the more of the theological question of, well, what's the efficient cause for it? And the Christian response would be, well, that was the moment of creation. That's when everything began. And you know, something that begins to exist doesn't begin to exist on its own. It's not there to create itself. And so you have a timeless, spaceless creator. Which also goes back to kind of the prior question about God existing outside of time. If we understand that time is a fourth dimension of creation, effectively, of space-time, then there's no such thing as time before creation. So you get a timeless
Okay, any more questions? Yes, go ahead.
When it comes to the Church of Jesus Christ, what is y'all's opinion on topics like abortion or other controversial topics? Should there be more of a keep it to yourself mentality and let the Lord do what he does, or should we get involved?
Okay. So the question is, should we, as Christians, keep the controversial stuff to ourselves, or engage the world in it, like abortion and the other controversial topics?
I'll try not to preach.
You're going to do it.
I think absolutely we should. I mean, we have to do it with grace and with some wisdom on when and how. But you know, it kind of goes back to like the whole Edenic vision, right? God creates Eden, and he tells Adam and Eve, okay, you know, here's this peaceful, orderly, wonderful place in a, you know, kind of untamed, I'll use that word, world. Take this kingdom, you know, take Eden, take my kingdom, you know, spread through the world, have dominion, subdue it, right? And after the fall, the plan didn't change. God still kept trying to have his people and say, okay, now go and, you know, make the world, you know, reflect my goodness and my light, you know, shine my truth into the world. Israel was supposed to be a nation of priests to, you know, proclaim the glory and goodness of Yahweh. Our role as Christians is to be salt and light, to go into the world and to, we were just talking about this last Wednesday at Bible study. In the Old Testament, you know, you see holy ground as being, you know, the temple, as being, you know, the burning bush. It's the place where God resides. And, well, in the New Covenant, where does God reside? In us. Each one of us is a point of light that we are to spread and shine God's goodness. It says that we are to love mercy and to do, you know, justly, and that we are supposed to love justice and goodness and fight for the oppressed and the innocent and downtrodden. And I think that whenever we see evils going on, like abortion or like things, you know, in darkness, and things that people would say, well, that's political. Well, it's not political. You just took it and moved it into a political arena. It's a moral issue, and we're supposed to be people that stand for the goodness of God. They go stand on moral issues. And so, yeah, I absolutely would say, yeah, get out there, do need to speak. That kind of touches a little bit into the separation of church and state thing that we could get into if you wanted to. Nod your head. Okay, I'll say a bit on that. I honestly think the separation of church and state, the way it gets spoken of by secularists is a complete misunderstanding. It had to do with the separation of the institution of the church from the separation of the institution of the government. That the government doesn't tell the church what to do, the church doesn't run the government, but ideologically, as far as ideas and beliefs and morality, absolutely our individual morality, informed by our religion, yes, has a role to play in our politics, in the policies we pursue, in the laws we want to see passed. And just because those ideas are biblically grounded on the truth of God doesn't make them any less valid in the public sphere. So absolutely, we need to be speaking and pursuing those things. I'm done.
So, are you pro-theocracy?
I would be anti-theocracy, just because it tends to not actually be a theocracy. It tends to be a priestocracy, and that just goes really bad.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really important to remember about the church is that we are to be the body of Christ. That we have a ministry of reconciliation. That we are to focus on preaching Christ and Him crucified to all people. And so one of my answer to your question would be a hesitant yes. That there are some things that we are clearly exhorted in the scriptures. I think abortion, human trafficking. I think some of those things which we are clearly, as the people of God, commanded explicitly to care for the poor and the downcast. We are to protect the oppressed. There are certain things that we are absolutely supposed to do. I'm very aware that I'm in Texas. So, but part of my concern is that a lot of times what ends up happening is that we become not evangelical in the sense of evangelizing and sharing the gospel, where what we say and what we teach it is for the purpose of presenting Christ and Him crucified to the world. But it's very much in the sense of protecting our evangelicalism and our rights. So rather than following Paul and becoming like becoming all things to all men, rather than focusing on ministry of reconciliation, what ends up happening is we do become somewhat politically. We become a political movement essentially, where where if you don't agree with a certain church on things of economics, you might be kind of seen as a questionable Christian, whereas really, what the scripture tells us about economics under the New Testament is give to Caesar what Caesar's and respect the authorities. It doesn't give us kind of you have to be a free market capitalist, private property owning type of thing, and so we get very kind of turned in on ourselves as Christians, where we're much more interested in kind of protecting our own privacy, our own private rights, our own property rights, and those things are wonderful. I'm not denying those things. I am a free market capitalist, but I want to make sure we draw a very strong line once we say, okay, well, once we come into sanctuary doors, the purpose of what we do at church is to gather as the body of Christ, to be fed by the Word, to share in the sacraments, to be nourished on Christ, and to be prepared and made ready to go out to the world to share Christ in crucifixion.
Yeah, and one thing that's really, you get on this topic, and there's so many different things that are well, yeah, but what about? And there's so much just different nuance. Well, okay, what you say addressing this, okay, well, does that mean this, and this? I'm not a political preacher. Probably about the only political message that you're going to ever hear from me from a pulpit is not a political message. People just pretend it is, and that's abortion. That's not a political issue. I don't care if people want to debate it in a steakhouse. That is a moral issue, and if you want to call it politics, you get over yourself, because it's just a moral thing. It's evil and needs to be stood up against. And that's about as political an issue as I'm going to talk, because everything he just said. I don't care who someone votes for. I'm not going to tell someone what party they should be in or if they belong to that party. I'm just going to preach God's word and let the principles and the truths of His word hopefully shape you and direct you where you should go. But we also have to understand there's general principles. Biblically, we should be pursuing the gospel. It should be about evangelism. It should be about our walk with Christ. But we also live in a free society where as citizens we play an active role in politics and government. And so, okay, well, how do I tread those waters? And I think that, again, like I said, just because our ideas are biblically informed doesn't make them any less valid than someone else's. And so we shouldn't be afraid to stand up in the public square as citizens, for citizens need to have a voice.
Yeah, you hit on a hot topic for me. I think one of the things that becomes challenging is we understand that, like you were saying, we live in some ways. I mean, I think most of us say one of the best countries because we have certain freedoms, because we have certain freedoms to be involved in the political process, because we have certain freedoms to express ourselves in more or less free ways, and we think that interruptions of that, more or less are good or bad, depending on what they are. However, as wonderful as that is, it creates complexities for the Christian life that didn't exist before. And so as Christians, really prior to kind of the American project, you didn't really have to worry about what do I vote for and how much do I impose what I think is right on other people via the poll booth. A lot of society was just kind of done for you from the top down. And so we didn't have some of these complexities in life. And so now, in living in the American project, living in a pluralistic, largely secular country, we have to ask ourselves, I want the freedom to gather publicly in my place of worship. However, for me to have that freedom, other people have to have that freedom as well to do things differently. I want to be able to express publicly, without fear of reprisal, what I think is a biblical view on abortion. However, in order for me to have that freedom, we create a system that is just intrinsically prone to conflict in that sense, and it just creates a massive amount of complexities that we now need to say, okay, well, not only what is the biblical view on abortion, we're now asking more macro questions of, well, how do I, as a Christian, in wisdom now rub shoulders with people in that marketplace, and do it again for the glory of God, for the purpose of grace. And so you get you get competing goals that are even competing Christian goals, where I want to be loving in Christ, share the good news of the gospel. I am to allow other people to impose their will on me. I am not to impose my will on other people. I'm to turn the other cheek, all this kind of stuff. But now I'm also allowed to vote for things, which in a way imposes my will on people. So it's in one sense it's the most Christian, and in some sense it really restricts our ability to be Christian and challenges us. So it's wildly complex.
Yeah, and as a speaker on topics like abortion, in fact, I'm going to be talking tomorrow, but my talk is going to actually be on bioethics and how Christians ought to think about the issue. Regarding abortion, it can actually be very difficult to get into a church because many pastors believe that the abortion issue is too political. They're afraid of alienating their parishioners, and which is why I appreciate pastors like Mark, who are willing to talk about the topic of abortion from the pulpit, because it's a very important topic, and it's one that a lot of pastors don't talk about, which is really tragic for a very specific reason. Women often, in fact, all the time, they're lied to about abortion in our society. They're told that their unborn child is nothing but a clump of cells or a mass of tissue. They're told that having an abortion is no big deal. It's just like having a tooth pulled or an appendix removed, and no one grieves over having a tooth pulled or an appendix removed. So they're lied to about the nature of the unborn, and they're lied to about how an abortion is likely to affect them. And so there are, now this isn't true of all women. Some women are perfectly fine after an abortion. But many women, after they have an abortion, they have a realization if their conscience hasn't been, as the Bible says, if it hasn't been seared with a hot iron, they're going to understand that it wasn't just a massive tissue that they had removed, but it was an actual living human being that they had killed, and that can really weigh on a person, and it can really devastate them. It can cause a lot of psychological harm. It can cause harm in their relationships. And the fact of the matter is that there's a large number of women who consider themselves Christians who go in and have abortions, which means that a large number of women sitting in those pews are post-abortive. And if a pastor never addresses this issue from the pulpit, those women are never going to be able to find healing, and that will even affect their relationship with God. So if the pastor isn't going to talk about it, he is likely the only person that they'll ever hear a pro-life message from. And so if he doesn't talk about abortion from the pulpit, and if he doesn't tell people that there is healing to be found, especially there is forgiveness to be found in Jesus, but there's also healing to be found in organizations like Rachel's Vineyard, then they're never going to find, and they're not going to seek it out for themselves because they just don't know that it's out there. So I think it's absolutely essential for pastors to talk about it from the pulpit. And I think that's a very specific reason as to why.
All right, so let's say you're sitting in church on Sunday, and there's two types of people divided here. There's those sinners who don't know Christ, and then there's those sinners who do know Christ. That's the only thing that separates you from the people outside, is that you have found that which cures the disease. So there is no us versus them, if properly understood. It's us for them. We are advocates for Christ to the benefit of those outside the door. Now, let's transition this into the political arena. You walk up to the voting booth and you're wearing a red badge, and he's wearing a blue badge. Now it's red versus blue. It's not you for him, it's you against him. And suddenly we've introduced competition into the element. At that point, when competition occurs, you draw a line of separation between you and that person. So there's no evangelicalism in there. You're not there to help that person. You're there to fight that person. And when we transition into the realm of politics, the us versus them concept that's introduced into the equation is definitely anti-evangelical. There is no element of love where you're trying to win this person to a better persuasion. You're trying to beat this person down. I recently studied this. I was interested in why people are interested in pundits and why people will even, I've read that people will say, if they're on the left, will listen to some of these right-wing pundits, and they'll listen to them specifically because they like feeling the righteous indignation against what they're saying. And I don't know, maybe some Republicans listen to NPR and feel the same kind of righteous indignation. That indignation, that sort of anger that you're feeling, actually has a addictive element to it. What do I mean? Well, it releases epinephrine, which is sort of a numbing agent, which helps, calm you down or numb some anxiety and other things that you might feel. So you're actually getting something helpful to yourself just by feeling that anger. It also gives you self-esteem because you're putting yourself on a pedestal of righteousness above this other person. Now, if we were doing that in church, if we were doing a I'm righteouser than thou, that's exactly how that's phrased, then, we're doing it wrong, because the idea is that we're beggars who have found the food, not that we're suddenly elevated above everyone else. But in the political realm, it will feel like that. It'll feel like you're above the person you disagree with. And so this element of drawing party lines, fighting against the other person, and coming to hate this other or this institution, that hatred is feeding this sort of addictive anger that we're feeling. So if there is a way to transition your Christianity into your politics insofar as you're approaching it from the vector of love, not us versus them, but us for them. So for instance, Clinton is going to speak on abortion. I'm sure that Clinton doesn't go around waving his fist at these poor women who are being convinced to kill their babies. I'm sure he's there to try to help them, to try to persuade them that this is something damaging to them. He's doing it out of concern, not out of party rage.
One thing that, and I know you know this because your family's involvement in the things that y'all do is, as an outsider, I've never really gotten into addressing the abortion thing. I was telling Tyler just earlier today that whenever I do address the abortion issue, I write my message and I stay on script, because if I let myself ad lib, it can go bad, and I might say things pastors shouldn't say from a pulpit. But I even in my lifetime, I've watched those who are anti-abortion go from the more virulent, kind of stuff to more of a pleading. Ma'am, please no. Don't, please come here, let us help you. And it's been interesting just in the last few decades that I've been alive watching that shift. And I'm sure you know that better than I do. But that's more of what you're saying. We're not supposed to be, they're not the enemy. And I think that's something where, unfortunately, we have decades worth of experience where that's exactly how we treated them. And it's just taking us undoing just time of, moving on past that.
Yeah, I think for me, one of my favorite novels is Les Miserables. And if you've ever read the book or seen the movie, the book is, by the way, far better than any of the movies. In the very beginning, one of my favorite characters is the Bishop of T, who effectively, the main character, Jean Valjean, is an ex-convict, and he is taken in by the Bishop of D into the convent, strikes him with candlesticks, steals a bunch of the silver and leaves. He's caught and brought back, and the bishop effectively says, "Why didn't you take more of the silver? Why didn't you, you took all this other stuff that I gave you?" He's lying to the guard who brought him back, but he's effectively saying, and he does say, he says, "Look, with the silver, I bought your soul. Now go be a good man." I'm not a pastor, so I can say things I shouldn't say. For me, one of my most controversial episodes that I ever put out was on gay marriage, because one of the ways that I do it is that the liberal impulse and the conservative impulse are both damaging. The liberals are denying that sin is sin, which means that Christ isn't necessary. You've now just said you don't need a cure. You don't need to submit that part to Christ. The often conservative side is the exact opposite. We now shut them out from the kingdom by saying effectively your sin is too sinful. You need to shape up before you come to Christ. And I think both of those are very, very damaging to the system, rather than saying we're gonna stand by the biblical principle of what the Bible tells us. Homosexual behavior it is sexual sin. You need to repent. You need to be saved. But if you have I have a gay couple who lives at class. If your partner is dying or in hospital, and you've adopted children, whatever I view of that politically, I'm going to bring you food, and I'm going to make sure that your children are taken care of, and I'm going to go and visit you, and I'm going to grieve when you're grieving, and I'm going to mourn with you. Am I going to say that your behavior is not sinful and you don't need Jesus Christ? No, but I'm going to absolutely love you and share the gospel with you. And by that, hopefully you'll be reconciled with Christ. So my concern, and this is why it gets so wildly complex. Now what do we do when we go to the voting booth? And in California, you have something like, a while ago there was Proposition 8, and the evangelicals raised $300 million. I always forget if Proposition 8 was for or against gay marriage.
It was against. It was to put in law that marriage is between a man and a
It was
woman.
basically the California version of DOMA, right?
Yeah,
So yes,
yeah.
they raised $300 million in favor of Prop 8. And the question always comes, for me at least, is had we now basically done something to our ability to minister to those people now, where we've now basically raised $300 million that could have gone to homeless shelters and abortion clinics and building orphanages and things that we are expressly commanded to do, and damage our reputation, we're now, as a Christian, I might not even be welcomed into the home of the sinners to eat with them and to mourn with them and to share the gospel with them, simply because, I'm a Christian, in that sense. And so it gets wildly complex now when I have to go vote. Well, of course I don't think, there should be a thing as gay marriage, but now what does that do to the gospel ministry and to our purpose? These are the types of things, again, where our freedom, we can have very conflicting things that are both good, and the way that we've set up our state makes it very, very hard to do both.
Well, at least now we know who done it. It was Jean Valjean in the monastery with the candlestick.
Okay, so we have a question from Mikhail, who's been very patient. I'm assuming this is more of a personal opinion type thing.
Ooh, I have those.
It's in theory.
I have one or two.
Yes, I've noticed.
I think we're all opinionated up here. So.
What would you say to a pastor of a large church who is pro-life, yet voted for Hillary, who openly admitted her support for abortion up until the day of birth? Are these sufficient grounds for leaving this church?
Like I already said earlier, I tend to not get political, like publicly as a pastor speaking. I'm not going to talk candidates. I'm not going to talk party. One-on-one as a friend, you catch me out in the parking lot after church or something, I might talk your head off, but whatever. But if it was someone who was a friend of mine who's a minister, and it's like, hey, hold on a second, what you're proclaiming from the pulpit is not lining up with what you're supporting politically. I don't think that I would get into the specifics of party or candidate or how could you vote for that person, how could you vote for that, but I would say, I think you need to take a look at, you're claiming this, but you're doing that, and I think that's probably just about the way I would do it. As far as like if I were a member of a church where something like that happened, I would do the same thing. I would want to go talk to the pastor. At my church, and I probably don't say it enough, I have an open door policy. I mean, if there's something I'm doing or saying that, you go, whoa, hold up there, preacher, come talk to me. I've been in situations where people have gotten mad at a preacher, was like, I can't believe he would say that, I can't believe he would do that, and they storm out mad and go tell 10 of their friends how horrible that church is. And whatever, it was like, well, actually, if you would have just talked to him for a second, it could have been resolved. And so, if I were at a church, I would come to the who a pastor was doing that. I'd come to him and say, preacher, I have a problem because on one hand you're saying this, on the other hand you're supporting that. I'm sitting under your teaching. What am I supposed to think? And depending on his answer, I might leave.
Yeah, I think one of the so I'm a Presbyterian. One of the vows that we make as an ordained elder, and then that we make, we have congregates make that become members, is that they vow to protect the peace and the purity of the church. And part of that is exactly what Mark was getting at. Is there's a very strong sense where we are conscience bound. Luther said, if I cannot be shown by the clear light of reason or from Scripture, it is not right or safe to go against conscience. Something along those lines. I think that there is a very real sense that we do have a lot of denominations in the United States, and that's in some ways is bad, because in some ways we've had church splits and denomination splits because of things like music and paint color, things like the ego of the people involved has caused church splits. But there is a lot of reason that we have denominations. We have Baptists and Presbyterians because we have different views on baptism. We can absolutely fellowship together. We can proclaim the gospel together. We can do all those types of things. But as matters of conscience, we hold to different theological convictions, and that's okay. I think I would go along with Mark and say, if I was sitting under a pastor who I thought I was in agreement on all kinds of things on, and suddenly they said something that was so jarring to me and so kind of out of sorts of what I thought, I would go to him, privately and try to have that conversation first, following Matthew 18, have that conversation with them privately. And that might be something where, depending on their justification for it, their reasons for it, I might have a matter of conscience where I would leave the church over something like that. I might not. It might be the case where I'm satisfied with their answer for why they believe those things. Maybe he's as ardently pro-life as I am. Maybe he thinks it's absolutely biblical, but he has different political views about what is just even feasibly possible. And so he might think that he might have views about what his vote accomplishes or not. So there might be other things that go into that that might satisfy might satisfy me to stay. So long as the gospel is being preached and the word is being preached. So.
Yeah, I'm not a pastor, but I am a music minister, and so I don't, I never talk about political parties or anything from the stage either. But if someone claims to be pro-life and yet they voted for Hillary Clinton, well, that's clearly inconsistent behavior, because Hillary Clinton believes in abortion up until the point of birth, and so you can't be pro-life and support a candidate who believes that abortion should be legal up until the point of birth. That's a severe conflict of interest. And now I've heard some arguments from some people who consider themselves Christian who believe that voting for Hillary is the pro-life thing to do, and they're just they're just so far divorced from reality that it's difficult to really have a conversation with those people, because they've already convinced themselves that Hillary Clinton is the most pro-life option when the evidence just doesn't bear that out, and their reasoning for why they believe Hillary Clinton should be elected rather than a pro-life candidate, or even someone like Trump. And I'm not saying we should vote for Trump, because I think if someone didn't vote for Trump either, I think that they were perfectly consistent in doing so, because there was absolutely no reason to believe that Trump would be a pro-life president. But if you don't want to vote for Trump, the alternative is not to vote for Hillary Clinton, because Hillary Clinton is just going to make the situation worse, especially for pro-life people. So whether or not you should leave the church over that, I don't know if I could really make that determination for anybody. I think that would have to be between you and God. There may be a reason for you to stay. Maybe you feel you might be able to work on your pastor and help him see why he's mistaken on this issue. Maybe he could be that person who changes his mind. But I can also understand why a person might leave and find a more seriously pro-life pastor who actually lives out his convictions. So yeah, so in summary, I don't think I can make that determination for anyone else, but I think there might be reasons for staying and there might be reasons for leaving. That'd be up to you and between you and God.
I don't think the 2016 election is a good litmus test on the political integrity of any given person, because you could weaponize your Christian beliefs against either one of those candidates pretty easily, and people did. So I would be hesitant about leaving the church because he voted for one terrible candidate or another. My only concern in that is that you came to know who he voted for, which means that he or someone else was spreading that knowledge around, and why was that? I don't have enough information to make that determination.
Okay, Mikhail is quiet for now, so does anyone else have a couple more questions?
I do. Could you explain predestination or chosen and compare that to free will?
So the question was, please compare and contrast predestination and election with free will. Nobody up there has any opinions on that, so I think we're done for the night.
I want to first apologize for laughing at every question we receive. It's just I happen to know exactly what everybody up here thinks.
We've had
We've had these discussions actually on this trip already. So actually, I was going to say, Tyler, would you like to?
Do we want to have the positive and the negative view first? I mean, how does that go in classic debates?
Well, let me just say.
Well, yeah, affirmative usually argues first, but.
Well, let me just say. I mean, I'll give my answer by way of simply clarifying what the different concepts are, the different views. This is a topic that I address quite a bit.
Do you?
I know. So there's two different views. Largely, there's a compatibilist view and an incompatibilist view. Compatibilists are people that come along and say that some version of divine determinism is compatible, it's the name, with some version of human freedom and human responsibility. There is a version of each one of those concepts that is compatible. An incompatibilist is going to come along and say, there is no compatible way that those concepts can be defined to make them compatible. They are incompatible. And ironically enough, the two opposite poles are both incompatibilists. So the two opposite poles are what's called hard determinism, typically associated with hyper-Calvinism, which is the view that we don't have freedom. We are divinely determined in such a way that I have no freedom whatsoever in any sense of the term. I agree that determinism and liberty and freedom and responsibility are incompatible with each other. I simply go on the side of determinism. I think determinism is true, and so therefore I deny freedom. Not I, the person who affirms that. The libertarian is on the other side is going to say, okay, well, we agree determinism and human responsibility and freedom are incompatible, but I think human freedom is true. And so we have a libertarian free. We have the power of what's called contra-causal choice. We are able to choose. We have the ability to choose other than what we actually end up choosing.
Yeah, and just real quick, it should be noted that this is not libertarian in the same sense as the political party,
Yeah.
but it's a different.
You are at liberty to choose. The compatibilist, which typically tends to be a reformed position, reformed Calvinist like myself, says, well, wait a second. We have both of these things represented in the scriptures under our interpretation. We think God, we see God sovereignly administering things. We see things in Acts where God says it was by His definite plan that you chose to crucify Christ. And so we look at these and say, okay, well, there has to be a sense in some way that they're compatible with each other. And some, like Jonathan Edwards, would propose that the way that happens is God decrees all things that come about. It is determined. It will absolutely come about based on what God has decreed to happen. But He decrees to bring things about via the decisions and the actions of morally free agents. They might not be in a libertarian sense free. They might not be able to have this kind of contra-causal ability to choose otherwise, which is called a categorical ability, but they have what's called a conditional ability. You have the ability to choose what you want to, you can choose to do what you want to do, right? So I do the very thing that I want to do, and so I'm morally responsible. I might not have the ability to choose anything else, but I'm able to do what I want to do. And because I'm doing the very thing that I want to do, right? So you know, if I want, we always get trivial examples, but if I want to pick up my phone as an example, I'm able to do the thing that I want to do. So even if I can't do not pick up my phone, I don't have the ability not to because of my desire, I'm still, if that was a morally praiseworthy or blameworthy action, I'm still responsible for it because it's exactly what I wanted to do. God isn't determining in the sense of saying, okay, well, you want to do something, but that's not part of my plan, so I'm going to suppress you from doing it. I'm not going to keep you from doing the thing you want to do. You're going to do the thing you want to do, and so you're more responsible for it. So the compatibilist is going to say that those are responsible. So those are kind of largely the different views. There are objections and rejoinders back and forth between those things. The compatibilist is going to look at the incompatibilist, the libertarian, and well, as a compatibilist, I'm going to look at the hard determinists and say, I don't see it as possible. The Bible very clearly says that we make choices and that we're responsible for them. So I'm just not even sure how you're even in this conversation. But to the libertarian, we're going to look at them and say, well, if you could choose otherwise, there's a very real sense where you could choose something other than what God foreknew you would choose, which may be a problem for omniscience. The libertarian is going to look at the compatibilist and say, okay, but how is it determined that I choose to pick up the phone? How am I morally responsible for that if God just indirectly caused me to do that? Because I'm doing what I most desire, but my desires are based on my nature, and God has determined what my nature is to be, so it's kind of just an end around to get to causal choice. So there's objections and rejoinders that kind of go both directions. And so the question largely comes down to what do you think is more in line with what the scriptures teach in these regards, and what do you think is simply more plausible responses one way or another? The fair on both sides?
There's none.
Clear as mud.
On some days, I choose to believe in determinism. On other days, I have been determined to believe in free will.
Well done, sir.
I honestly, this is one of those things where we're like you said, they're both in the Bible. I mean, they're there. There's verses that just flat out talk about things being predestined and people being chosen and elect, and there's ones that just flat out talk about choosing. And I honestly think that I tend to stay away from those debates. And you do not. Because I think that we're all going to get to heaven one day, and whenever we have a little better understanding, both sides or all parties involved in whatever side you're on, going to go, oh, okay, that's what I was missing, right? Because it's something that we hold in tension trying to figure out. But we, like you mentioned, or someone mentioned, about how they, crucified, they chose to crucify Christ according to what God's predetermined.
Yeah.
And if you just like sit and think on that for a while, it's gonna, cook your brain. Because, slain from before the foundation of the earth, this wasn't plan B. God knew this was gonna happen. But the Sanhedrin had to choose to be corrupt and have a fake trial. Pilate had to choose to give in and crucify him. The mob had to choose to, shout crucify him. I mean, everyone involved made choices to get them to the place they were at and the things they were doing. But God had determined it was going to happen.
Yeah. And not just foreknew that it would happen,
Yeah.
it says by definite plan.
Yeah, and it's like, I don't know, but they were choosing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
I think this can be a very heated topic, and sometimes I can get very heated on it. But typically, when it comes to people having these conversations where we're having them in an open spirit of dialogue, we're trying to understand each other, the conversations go well. The problems happen when you start. I'll talk to people that are very, very almost very dogmatic libertarians, where they're basically, rather than saying, okay, well, let's understand, I disagree with you in charity, but let me understand your views, we disagree. It's good to be like, you deny God because you say humans are robots. And I'm like, well, that's not my view. You have to affirm that humans are robots. That's just what it has to be. And I'm like, well, it's not actually what it has to be. That's not my view. Let's, whatever. Or on the other side, where the compatibilist is gonna be basically telling the libertarian in a way, well, you're just saying people are more sovereign than God. You're denying God because you're saying that, they're more omnipotent than He. You get these very caricatures of opposing sides, and those are the types of conversations that aren't typically very productive. And I've been in those very commonly in those conversations that never fun. And at a certain point, you just say, hey, you're not hearing my side. I can only restate this so many times. And, typically towards my side, the confusion is, well, compatibilists just get lumped in with the hard determinists, where, hey, you're just saying we're all robots. And I'm like, well, no, I'm a compatibilist. I'm not an incompatibilist. And so it gets that way, and there just has to be some charity in those conversations.
Yeah, and just like with any conversation, because talking about any sort of view that we hold, very deeply is going to ruffle some feathers and can have the potential to cause people to get upset and to name call and that kind of thing. And so it really, no matter what the issue is, it really takes a determination by both parties to have a calm, rational conversation and not get upset just because someone is espousing a view that you disagree with. And I don't know if this is necessarily the place to really defend these views, because I think the question was just about what the differences between them. I lean more toward libertarian free will, and of course, I don't think Scripture speaks clearly enough about this to really say with 100% certainty that my view is correct, and I couldn't be argued out of it. Again, just like these gentlemen here, I affirm that Scripture seems to teach both predestination and free will. And so the question then is, how do we reconcile? Because obviously, if we're morally responsible for our acts, well, then we can't be predetermined to perform these acts, because you're not morally responsible for an act you had no choice but to do. There's a difference between, for example, if you rob a bank, you'll be held responsible for theft. But if someone is holding a gun to your daughter's head and says, "Go rob that bank," well, the court is going to take that into consideration because you're robbing the bank under duress, and so you're not morally responsible for that because you're being forced to by extenuating circumstances. So there has to be some way of reconciling both of these, and so whether you believe in free will or compatibilism or hard determinism, then that's going to really affect how you interpret what God means by predestination and by free will, those kinds of things. If you have two people in mortal jeopardy, that's not really. That's not really what the predestination versus free will debate comes down to. But if you have two people in mortal jeopardy, because and again, we can talk about predestination versus free will because who you save. For example, if we're talking about like a case of triage in which you have two patients who are mortally wounded, the one who you can save is the one that you would save. Now you could say that, well, the doctor didn't have a choice but to save that patient because his training and his determination that she was the one with the best chance of survival, all of these things went into his decision to save the other person. Oh, what's that? Well, it depends on the situation because if you have two people in mortal jeopardy, in this case a pregnant woman with her unborn child, and you can save two different people. If you have two people who are in mortal jeopardy, you can only save one. Well, you would save the person with the best chance of survival, which would be the woman. The unborn child is not one that you can save, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can kill the unborn child in order to save the woman's life. There still has to be some sort of ethical decision making going on, and so that's why a philosopher would probably rely on something like the principle of double effect, in which you have a bad thing that's going to happen. In this case, the pregnant woman and the unborn child are going to die. You can perform a good act, which is morally comparable to the bad act. That is saving the life of one of the people. If you can save someone's life, well, that's morally comparable to losing a life. So you're basically weighing one life against another. And so there are four basic conditions that have to be satisfied in order for a double effect to justify the act that you take. One of those being that the good effect has to be comparable to the bad, and so you're saving a life versus losing a life. Another one is that you cannot intend the death of the person's life that you lose, or you cannot intend the bad effect because a good end does not justify a bad means. So in this case, for example, if we're talking about ectopic pregnancy, well, there are three different ways that we can resolve it. An ectopic pregnancy, for those who don't know, is that the unborn child, when it is conceived inside the fallopian tube, it implants inside the tube rather than inside the uterus where it's supposed to, and that can result in once the embryo grows big enough, the mother's tube will rupture, that will cause internal hemorrhaging, and she will likely die. And the unborn child is likely going to die anyway because the embryo obviously is not old enough to survive outside the womb on its own. So in this case, the second condition that has to be fulfilled is that you cannot intend the bad act because a good end does not justify a bad means. So you cannot intend the death of the embryo. But in this case, if you resolve the ectopic pregnancy, the death of the embryo is not intended. You're intending to save the pregnant woman's life. The death of the embryo is merely foreseen, but is not intended. So that would satisfy the second criterion. The third criterion is that the act that you perform cannot directly cause the bad act to happen. So if you're going to perform an act that would result in the death of the embryo, it cannot be a direct act by the doctor. So, for example, methotrexate would be out of the question because you're directly killing the unborn child by administering a pill that's going to directly kill the embryo. A salpingostomy, which is basically where you cut a hole in the fallopian tube and remove the embryo, and then repair the fallopian tube. That would seem to be out of the question too, because you're directly killing the embryo by removing it from the environment in which it can survive. And so, what would be medically indicated would be salpingectomy, which is where you remove the portion of the fallopian tube. And that way, you're not directly killing the embryo, but the embryo does indirectly die as a result of the action by the doctor. And so that would seem to satisfy the third. Now, there is a debate amongst pro-life philosophers as to which of these different methods actually satisfies double effect. So my arguments here are not the end of the matter, because someone like Christopher Kaiser would actually argue that a salpingostomy actually satisfies the third criterion also. So this is not really the end of the discussion at all. There's a debate amongst pro-life philosophers about which one would satisfy these conditions. And then the fourth condition, what is, let's see, so the negative consequence, well, I think that was covered in the proportionality though, that the good effect must be comparable to the one. Well, anyway, there's the fourth criterion that must be satisfied. But the two most important ones are the intention and the direct killing. Because when you try to resolve an ectopic pregnancy, the death of the embryo is foreseen but not intended, and you must act in such a way that it may indirectly result in the death of the embryo, but it does not result as a direct act from the doctor. So that's kind of how I would argue about resolution of a life-threatening pregnancy, which I believe is the only kind of pregnancy which would actually justify an abortion.
Let's do one more question and then we'll wrap it up.
Do clones have souls?
Oh, I'll take this
Not
one
from
again.
you.
Oh, are we not answering that one?
You can
Okay, yes, clones have souls. Basically, and this is something I'll probably touch on tomorrow in my talk also. But basically, the way that you clone is through a process called somatic cell nuclear transfer, where you remove the nucleus of the woman's ovum and replace it with genetic material of a host. And so basically, you're going to grow another human being that is genetically similar to the original person. And so you're conceiving an actual human being. And once the human being's life begins, once the embryo is conceived, well, that human being has a soul, because the soul is basically just the animating factor of a living thing. And so once that living thing becomes a living thing, then it has a soul. So that's just basically the long and short of it. And so clones do have souls. I had another point that I wanted to mention, but. Oh yeah, and clones are not identical to the person that whose genetic material it comes from, because nurture is as much responsible for our personalities as nature is, and even nature itself, your genes could express themselves in a different way than it does in your clone. So like if you have, like some people raise the thought experiment about a mother who loses her only child and then has the child cloned in order to kind of replace the child and get the child back. Well, the problem with that is that the child that results may look the same, and it may have the same DNA, but it's not going to be the same child. It's going to be a different child, and that child is going to develop in certain ways that are different. I mean, we can look at identical twins. That identical twins often develop different things. Like one can be right-handed, one can be left-handed, or various things can happen to one twin but not the other. And so when we look at a clone, the clone that results is going to be a different person with likely a different personality. If we were to clone, for example, Mozart, well, if you clone Mozart to a scientific family that doesn't really care much about music, well, he's not going to grow up to be a musician. Because he's not going to have those same opportunities he did originally when he was conceived. So all of that to say that when you clone somebody, even though it's genetically the same and may look the same, it's still a different person, and once that person is conceived, it has a soul, because all living things have souls.
John, over to you, wrap us up.
All right, well, thank you all for coming out tonight, we appreciate it. Let's give a round of applause to our panel discussion. So, thank you all very much for your questions. Thank you, Mikkel, for your challenging questions. Thank you for your questions, very, very great. Thank you for your debate. That was the shortest I think Tyler has covered predestination ever, like ever.
Yeah, it was a pretty impressive summary, though.
Yeah, it was very good. Like,
You were here to.
it was, so this is a one-time event. Tyler was able to talk about predestination and election in under 5 hours, so please, around.
It's because I'll talk to him for like 2 hours after this.
You open yourself up for that. But again, thank you all very much.
Recap it tomorrow.
Yeah.
What's happening tomorrow?
All right, so tomorrow is at 9 a.m. We're having our debate between Tyler and Aaron Ma on whether or not Christianity in particular has been a detriment to science. So please come out for that. That will be live streamed. So that's 9 to 12. And then we'll have a short break for lunch. And then from 1 to 5, we have panel discussions or just a brace discussion.
Individual talks.
Individual talks, yeah, individual talks. So again, thank you all very much for coming out tonight. Please stay tuned for tomorrow.
We'll be around for a while, so if you wanted to talk to any of us, that's fine. There's a book table back there. We've got some merchandise. I'll be there if anybody wants to see what we got.
And we actually have bulletins back there that, I don't know who all maybe got one or skipped it, that has information on us and our individual ministries and the schedule for tomorrow printed on it, so.
Oh, yeah, I missed the part that I wanted to talk about on the free will question. That's okay.
Yeah, the debates
Did I miss anything interesting?
tomorrow morning at 9. So yeah. Yeah, it's back there. Yeah, you're welcome. Hey, thanks for what was your name? Nate. All right, cool, Nate.
Hop it off there.
Will you here tomorrow?
What do you push to make it end?
Oh, cool. Awesome. Cool.
I'm
And we're
thinking
gonna
the
have,
X.
like, question and answer after, during the last, so the debate's 3 hours. So the third hour is